Well, hello everybody, and welcome to WordCast number 76. Once again, very proud of myself for getting that correct again. But we've got a pretty big week this time, actually. There's a lot of stuff. I know we actually did miss last week, and there was just stuff came up. Don't worry, that's not a consistent theme. Just things got a little bit crazy. And we also wanted to be able to include some of the WWDC news and stuff like that, so it ended up just making more sense to do it a week later. So here we are. We're back with lots of interesting news for you guys. And one thing I want to mention here at the very beginning is our security news segment is actually going to be moved to a separate video from here on out instead of being in the main podcast. Just because I think that's something that's less. We think that's something less conversational, and so I'm gonna shell that out as its own thing. So
Yeah, we discussed that earlier, and it just seems like it ends up being something where it's mostly just you talking, and me kind of just sitting there listening. And I just think that
yeah,
overall it can be better formatted for the people that really care about that stuff, as its
I
own
think so too.
thing, and then you don't have to stare at my beautiful face for 20 minutes.
I mean, what if we want to?
Then you can watch the rest of this podcast.
What if we want to?
That's what the rest of the podcast is
What
for.
if we want
Oh my
to?
gosh.
So yeah, we've got WWDC kind of coming up here in the frontliner here, and you know what? I know this channel, our channel, is focused a lot on servers and PC, but there's I think Apple News is still something important to cover, and there was a lot of interesting things. So
And some of
we're gonna
this
go ahead
is
and
going to have less so with the initial topics of the iPhone and iPad related software, but more so with
yeah,
the second section about the Mac. I do think that's going to have long term some effects on the PC market, and so we'll have to talk about
I
that as
think so
well.
too.
Um,
Absolutely, yeah. Plus, I'm sure there's gonna be some banter in this
oh yeah.
in the iOS section.
But yeah, so let's jump right into it. So they announced both iOS 14 and iPadOS 14. This is a pretty big change, especially on the iOS side. But the way that we'll break this down, I want to talk about the features that are coming to both, and then we'll talk about the specifics of iPhone and then the specifics of iPad. Now we're not going to.
And I think it's pretty big for both. It really is pretty big for both. It's just
Yeah, but
it's
we'll get into it. But there's some things that are by nature of how different products work a little bit different on each. We'll get into
yeah.
it, but to start with the features that are found on both, and again, we're only going over what I feel like are some of the more important features. Like there's, the Maps app is updated, for example. The Photos app is updated on all of them, but that's not really
Yeah.
that big of a deal in the grand scheme. Like nobody uses Apple Maps.
There's so many little
Yeah.
things. It's like it would just be impossible to cover
So
it
we
all.
mostly want to talk about the stuff that we find more interesting. So the first thing is Siri is getting some pretty big changes. For one, and this is the more talked about one, even though I think it's actually the least important of the two big changes. Siri is a lot less visually intrusive now. So rather than
Yeah.
taking you to your own or like its own screen, which is what Siri has traditionally done since it launched, it will instead bring up like the Siri, like a little bubble down at the bottom of the screen. And once you ask it its question, it will give you the information in a small window that's more akin to a notification. So if you ask it for the weather, if you ask it something IoT related or for some other information or to add to a list, it just gives you a little notification. You cannot interact with the content that is under Siri while you are using it.
And that bothers me for iPad specifically, actually.
Yeah,
That is
so
not I don't have a problem with that for the phone.
yeah. So
Um
if you guys have not yet watched it, Marquez Brownlee interviewed Craig, who is the senior vice president of software development, I believe it is, at Apple. And they talked about this. And he said that, Craig said that this was a very deliberate decision. So they actually built out both versions, both a version of Siri where you can interact with the content underneath and a version of Siri where you can't. And the reason that they decided to go with the version where you can't interact with the content underneath is because for most interactions, you get the information and then you want to move on. And so if you can
yeah.
interact with the content underneath, then that means that you have to specifically go up and deliberately swipe away Siri, or you have to wait for it to time out, and then they'd have to figure out how long they want that to be. Whereas, for in most cases, you just can, with the current build, just tap anywhere on the screen to get it to go away and go back to what you're doing. And so
Yeah, and
they,
I can understand like it getting intrusive, especially on smaller screen
yeah,
devices. So I actually like the move for smaller screens, but I personally still think having it like in the corner or something on iPad where it can be persistent, you can have it do commands while you're working would be really useful.
yeah. And so that was something that they had talked about in the interview with Craig, and he was actually open to that feedback because they already have both versions built. So it's really just a
Yeah,
toggle internally. And so
and it's so cool to see them listening to feedback like that. Like he seemed genuinely fine and interested
this,
in feedback. That is not
it's not
Apple,
just
you
not
know?
Apple. When has Google ever done that?
Yeah, when has anybody ever done that? And especially somebody so high up in the
Yeah.
company done anything more? This isn't like like sure MKBHD has interviewed Elon and stuff like that, but this was not a like I want to interview you because you're successful. This was a I want to talk to you about some criticisms and stuff of your OS
Hmm.
and give feedback. When he talks to Elon, he's not giving feedback on the Tesla. He's talking about
Yeah.
Elon. This was a very much so about the product.
Yeah, and one of the nice things too about this interview was when they were discussing, because Marquez brought up the same thing of how that does make more sense on iPhone than it does on iPad. And Craig's response to him was, "How would you want that to work on iPad, specifically in dismissal of the notification?" So obviously, if you can interact with it underneath it, you have to manually dismiss it. And he was saying, "Do you want that to be something that times out? Do you want that to be something you just have to swipe away?" And so he kind of took that feedback to heart and said, they would talk about that internally.
Yeah.
And then they're going to use the dev preview and the beta time to get more feedback on that, especially once public beta comes out and they can get a lot more people trying it. Um, and they can kind of go from there. And again, because it's already built out, it's much easier for Apple to just say, okay, by launch, we'll just switch it if people like it that way more. And they
Yeah,
can,
I mean, we've got a lot of time until
yeah,
launch,
because
so
realistically, this probably won't come
it's
out until
yeah,
September.
yeah. And I mean, I'm gonna grab the beta as soon as I
Oh, yeah.
can, but
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, in the history I have with iPadOS betas has been minimal
Mhm.
bugs. There was one time I had something major. I don't remember what it was. There was something that kept crashing, but generally it's pretty stable. So like, I'm happy to try it out right away. And anyway, I just think it's impressive that they're taking this kind of feedback. And like, I think for iPad, it would make a lot of sense to have it persistent
Mhm.
potentially, so that you can be typing and working on something, and you can have Siri there, like actually taking commands from you consistently to do things, do actions that take more time with the screen.
Yeah.
And then you're starting to get into this interesting multitasking on an iPad, right? Where you could have a picture-in-picture video playing while you're typing up a document, as well as asking Siri to reply to messages.
Yeah.
Like that could be really
Yeah,
useful.
and then in addition to that, I mean, even if you just look at just the basic examples that Apple used, like one of the examples they used was adding things to a shopping list from um, a recipe that you're looking at. Well, it'd be very nice to be able to scroll through. Let's say you're on a page with multiple recipes, or you're on a page with a pretty long recipe, or something like that. It'd be nice to be able to scroll through and just kind of more naturally read through the recipe as you're doing it, and continually add
Okay.
stuff to it rather than having
Yeah.
to
Yes.
scroll, say, launch Siri again to add to it, have it do the animation, come up, and then you close it.
That seems less
Yeah,
convenient. Yeah, having to do that repetitively like that would annoy me significantly. So, and again, I mean, on iPhone, I think it makes sense because on iPhone, I'm not trying to type up a document for doing a video or something, right? But like when you're on the go and you're trying to take notes, or you're trying to work on something, like you can do real work on the iPad, and I still feel like phones, they're just too small. You can't do most real work on them, right? They're for quick notes, quick things, calendars, but not real
yeah,
work.
especially since you can type on the iPad. I mean, you can obviously do this on the
Yeah.
iPhone, but since it's a more common use case to be typing on the iPad from an external device, where Siri is,
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing Siri on the iPhone, the like bubble for Siri at the bottom still covers up where your keyboard would be visually.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you're typing from the Magic Keyboard or the Folio keyboard or any other keyboard, which is clearly how Apple wants some people to use the iPad, then it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to lose all interactivity with something over something that's just a visual on the bottom corner of the screen.
Right,
So
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so I think, yeah, I agree there. And I mean, they could even put it in the top corner. I don't know. They could potentially put Siri in the notification pane. That's something that we've seen some Android devices do, and do that. For which is something we don't see a lot of in iOS is like persistent notifications. But other than obviously media playback and stuff is something that already exists. But having it up there could potentially work on iPhone to not interrupt things. But the other concern that you start to run into is then you forget that it's on, and on something that has a smaller battery, it's potentially a breach of privacy if it's listening to you and you don't want it to be because you forgot about it, that kind
yeah,
of
I don't
stuff.
think they would ever do that, but I do think that I
Yeah.
mean already like most iPad apps don't put a ton of info in the bottom right corner of the screen. And so I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
it's already out of the way enough that they should just let it be interactable.
Agreed. And I think the
Or
only.
and I don't think they should do this on I mean I do think they should do this, but I don't think they will do this on iPhone, but I think it's more
Mhm.
likely on iPad. Make a toggle in the settings.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be really cool too. And they could even have a feature where it dynamically changes, which is something that Apple's always a fan of. And this is just one example, but there could be a lot of reasons for it, right? But like certain apps are open, maybe,
I
then it stays
I
persistent.
don't think even Apple
But
would want that. Something else that we'll
well,
talk about later in this is defaults, but they kind of talked about the idea
yeah,
of in that interview of not wanting apps to have kind of the ability to do malicious control over OS stuff. And I think that you would run
hmm,
into the issue of, let's say you have an app that, let's say, has a Siri shortcut, and then that app, when open, can on its own decide to, or use an API to trigger Siri being open more. So if you launch Siri while that
yeah,
app is open, it can have its own shortcut that kind of uses that to gather more information or something like that. There are ways that that could be, if it's controlled by the app developer, it could be a new attack vector, and it doesn't actually simplify things for users. It makes it more complicated because people don't know what apps
hmm.
are going to do what.
So I agree. And actually, the better example that I wanted to use was potentially have it so that it changes whether or not it's persistent, dependent on whether or not you're using a external keyboard or
Mm-hmm.
not. So then it's not wasting screen space if you are using the built-in, touchscreen keyboard instead.
Yeah.
Possibly, but I don't know. I mean, my experience of typing on the iPad, obviously touchscreen typing is not ideal unless you're doing like split thumb, and then they could just put it in the middle anyway. So I would just like to see an option for it to be persistent on iPad, though, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think it should just be a toggle.
I agree. Yeah, I
So,
think I think that's probably the simplest way to do it.
and then the other big update to Siri is that they have improved the ability for it to answer questions in a way that's more similar to Google Assistant, because they have built their own kind of like I version of like the knowledge graph from Google, which for those that don't know what that is, the way that Google Assistant works and the way that Google Search works, where it shows you results from web page, is their knowledge graph. And so essentially, Google has built in the ability for their backend tools to read and like parse through web pages and pull pertinent information based on your search. And
Well, and to be clear, that's actually something that the web developers can push out themselves as well to be to kind of opt in for that.
yeah, but
And so like
but
yeah,
like that is the idea of like why Google Assistant is able to get that information in the first place, is that they
yeah,
have that in place. And so Apple is doing that on their end as well now, where they can pull information from websites so that they can more accurately and more helpfully answer questions. Whereas right now, if you
yeah.
ask any question that they haven't essentially coded in, it then just kind of says go to this website for the information. Whereas presumably with iOS 14, I haven't gotten to mess with it that much, but from my understanding, it should um, just be able to get that information from the website and read it to you like you would expect a digital assistant to do.
Yeah, and that would be really nice. Siri has had some, not it has been not so great when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I would really like to see that as
Yeah,
well.
and I think that
So,
between shortcuts from iOS 13 and this, it solves really the two biggest issues with Siri. Because Siri
yeah,
did a bad job at tying in with apps. That's solved now through shortcuts. Apps have the ability to uh, like prompt you to for you to confirm you want to add shortcuts to Siri. You can manually make shortcuts. You can do a lot with Siri through shortcuts now. But it was still
yeah.
just bad at answering questions, and this should solve that. And so, while it's not getting the hype and pizzazz that I think Apple could have given it if they would have done both at the same time, I think
Hmm.
if they would have come out with the Siri visual update as its own thing, and then come out with new answer system and a new shortcut system as like a we are revamping Siri, it would have been a little more hyped up. Whereas now all everyone's really talking about is the visual design. Even though I feel like
Yeah,
this is more important as far as making it a good product. Like
it's
realistically,
like actual
yeah,
functionality. Yeah,
realistically, my issue
yeah.
with using Siri or not was never whether or not it covered my screen. It was that it wasn't useful.
Yeah, you're right, right. No, and I entirely, I obviously I don't use Siri a ton because I don't have an iPhone. I use it on my iPad, but it definitely like feels lacking compared to Google
Yeah.
Assistant, and I would like to see some more competition in that
Mhm.
realm. So I think it's really a benefit that they're doing this, and I hope that they're able to do as good of a job with it as Google has, or at least similar.
Yeah. And then the next feature, this actually is kind of similar to the less intrusive Siri, something that people have been requesting for a very long time on iPhone. Incoming calls no longer take up the entire screen. That's
Very
the
nice.
feature. That's probably like
Android's had that for so
yeah,
long.
it's one of those like extremely requested features that it was just like for whatever reason Apple decided not to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And now they're just
And
doing it.
it's like, yeah, yeah. And I feel like there's gonna be that, and you guys will see more of this soon, but there's gonna be that recurring theme of like some of the bigger things that people like about Android are being pulled over here. And it's like, I think enough for some people to be like, okay, now maybe it's worth a consideration. Like it's a consideration, was a consideration for me to potentially actually try like using iOS as my primary device again. Um, and that's, that's something that I haven't really felt in a long time is any compelling
Mhm.
want to do that.
Yeah.
And so these changes as we go through here, you will hear me mocking the fact that Android's had it, but like there's no downside to adding a feature that is great and something else has had for a long
Yeah.
time.
And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about, so voice dictation is now completely handled on device. They already did most voice
Yeah.
dictation on device on iOS 13,
Right.
but they have improved their voices to text models so much that it is now completely on device. And this includes translation. So Apple has a new translation app that's coming as part of iOS and iPadOS 14, and it can do translation. It doesn't have anywhere near as many languages as something like Google Translate, but it does
Yeah.
all of the translation on device. You don't even need an internet connection at all. And then in addition to that, it can. It's not just a one-way thing, so it's not like if you wanted to do English to Spanish, it's not just English to Spanish, and then if you want to flip it, you have to then press a button to flip it.
Right. It
You
can do back and
select two
forth, right?
languages, and it's just ready to go with both languages to translate them back and forth. And so
And that's really
yeah,
awesome.
if
Yeah.
you're, let's say you travel to, I'll use Mexico since I was just using Spanish as an example. If you travel from the US to Mexico and you don't speak Spanish, well, you can just have that app and just place your phone down, speak, it'll translate it, and then they can speak and it'll translate it to you. Um,
Yeah. That's really
yeah.
cool.
And so it's just very helpful, and it's so nice that that is run on device. They don't have to send data to the cloud, both for privacy, but also because like a lot of carriers still charge a lot for international data, and so not having to pay for that is great.
And I think that right there is actually the bigger thing for me. I mean, obviously I'm a privacy focused person, but I,
Yeah.
like, I think the bigger thing is just the ability to do this without an internet connection, and the dictation on top of that, right? Because especially for people that use dictation like a lot, that are potentially using it because of a disability
Hmm.
or something, having that not work because your internet's down
Yeah.
is shitty.
Yeah. And there's some
And
other
so making that better is
Yeah,
important.
and there's some other accessibility features in here we'll talk about, and there's a lot more that we won't talk about, but Apple's been doing a lot that's actually going to be really helpful for a number of different accessibility needs.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I'm glad that they
yeah,
are. They're still the platform I'd recommend for anybody that has, accessibility needs.
yeah. And then the next big change that's coming for this is actually iPhone, iPad, and macOS because iMessage is on all of them. But there are some changes to iMessage. The smaller but very helpful change is that you can now pin messaging threads to the top. And what I really like about how they're doing this is it's not pinning the actual preview of the thread. Rather, it's just pinning their picture, and it'll give you like an icon if you have a notification from them. And so
That's
you can
nice.
have a lot, you can have, I think, like 9 people pinned up top above all of your messaging threads. And it can be people or group chats. Um,
Right.
and then what's cool is if they're messaging you from an iPhone, um, via iMessage or any iMessage device, I guess, um, it will actually show you the typing indicator from just the Messages app. You don't actually have to go into their message if they're typing a response, and it will
That is
show
really
a small
nice. Yeah.
preview of the message over their picture if they send you a message while you're on that page.
That's nice. That's nice. iMessage is still the better messaging platform. It's
Hmm.
true, and they're continually adding more functionality to it. It seems almost like they are adding more stuff in part because they see Google kind of coming up on the horizon with RCS of finally, something semi-competitive to iMessage,
Yeah, and
and
what I
yeah,
fully expect, and with the next two things that we'll talk about are specifically with the actual messaging aspect rather than just like a visual thing within the app. Um,
yeah,
but at some point, Apple is. I would be very surprised if they just never implemented RCS. It'd be very stupid, I think, because eventually carriers are going to want to move away from SMS if RCS is good. Um,
agreed. And I think the eventual global goal is just no more SMS. SMS is
yeah,
terrible. Like, let's just move away from
Yeah,
it.
and so with that, I think that what Apple wants to do is try and keep iMessage feature-wise uh, ahead of RCS, and I think that's the way they
Yeah,
do it.
yeah,
So RCS is pretty similar to what iMessage has been for a while. There's still some things iMessage does that RCS doesn't, but it's much
yep,
closer than SMS. However,
yeah, yeah,
with this new version of iMessage, they're adding some enhancements for group messaging that RCS doesn't have. So for one, you can get mentions within it, which there have been other apps that do this. Allo did it, for example, when we had tried that. You could tag specific people.
yeah,
Um,
yep,
so you can tag people within group chats, and you can make it so that if you only want to be notified from the group chat when you're tagged, you can do that, which is very nice because group
hmm,
chats are obviously very chaotic sometimes. But the other, and in my opinion, the bigger upgrade for group chats is that they're adding inline replies. So to kind of explain this, if you don't have context, I mean, you guys will know this from like social media. It's kind of like social media comments. And so the way that this works is, you can send a message to your group chat about something. Let's say you're making plans to go camping. You could have a message about the supplies and a message about the location and a message about the date and time you guys want to do it. And you can reply specifically to each of those messages. And rather than it cluttering up the entire thread, it kind of ties it to that message as a direct, smaller reply to that.
yeah, right, right. And I I feel like Apple has to do quite a bit to try and stay ahead of RCS as well. And the reason I'm saying that is because I feel like as RCS slowly becomes more widely adopted of being the default on all Android devices, I think it is going to be easier for Google to make updates to it because it's not a protocol that they can just not touch, right? And so it's kind of good to see competition in this area. I feel like it's an area that's going to
So
drive
I
competition for a
don't
long
think
time.
it's going to be that easy for Google to add certain features, because the thing about RCS is that since it's a universal standard, apps are built differently. Google can't add, for example, inline message replies um, on
Right,
their
that's true.
own.
Yeah.
They can add the feature, but how long is it going to take for that feature to be widespread? And the issue is that
I
until
think
that,
that just depends. I don't know how the update path is for RCS. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
but I mean, like something like inline messages requires visual changes. There's no way that
Hmm.
every app is being built with Google having full control over the visual aspects of messages within their apps.
Yeah, and actually to top that off too, Google has to be careful because we want RCS to be something that is a global
Mhm.
standard, and if it's a global standard, then this stuff would have to be things that iPhone would have to start supporting too. We don't want we don't want features of RCS to be Android exclusive. Like the vision I have, and I think a lot of people have for RCS, is a proper, complete cross-platform, complete compatibility thing where you don't have differences depending on your
Yeah.
device. And that would be a benefit to communication as a whole,
Mhm.
is the ability to communicate with any platform. And I mean potentially even going as far, right, as like weird OSs like Lineage and Sailfish, or if Windows Phone comes back or whatever. And so yeah, I think you're actually probably
Yeah.
right
I
there.
just
Whereas Apple can very easily make changes like
Yeah,
this.
I just don't see, with what I've heard and seen about how the RCS standard is kind of set up and communicated, I just don't see it being something that's easily updatable. It feels
Yeah.
more like it's going to be, probably much more frequently than SMS, because it
Yeah,
presumably
yeah,
is
but it'd
updatable,
probably be still
but it's
like,
a every few years at best thing.
yeah,
And even
or
then,
even potentially every year, but it can't be as big of an update.
well,
Right? It has to be something that
it
like,
has to be a big enough change, I feel like, for them to get all OEMs on board. And the issue is that
yeah, yeah,
because Android is so terrible with software updates, it's going to be one of those things where any new feature will likely only come to the phones that have been out for a year or two. And
yeah,
the big issue with updating RCS in general, even getting it adopted is already a mess.
yeah,
But eventually that'll happen, and it's one of those things where a lot of the features that we're seeing of RCS, the faster communication, the better images, the the notification that someone is typing, those types of things are not really that big of a deal for you to just not have if you message somebody else. But inline replies, for example, are. Mentions are. If you add
yeah.
those and they don't work because one person doesn't have it, you need some kind of visual indicator. iMessage has that by the green bubbles and the blue bubbles, is that anyone on iMessage is, iPhone gets the updates, and most people update fast enough that a month after iOS comes out, most people will have these new features.
This is true.
Whereas
Yeah,
two
yeah.
years after an Android update comes out, yeah, most
I,
Pixels will
I,
have
well,
it,
I
but
think,
most Samsung phones won't.
yeah. Well, and I think what it is that, yeah, it comes down to whether or not it's a protocol backend update or a visual messages
Yeah.
upgrade, right?
So like,
If there's like a security thing they
uh,
can do on just RCS itself, that could be potentially be globally, done just working with the carriers to make sure the carrier's tech supports it and not have to touch the device necessarily. But then, having to do, visual upgrades, I think you're
yeah.
right there, is that's something that is hard to do. And even if they can just push it through the app store with messages, right?
Mhm.
Like if it's something that requires a new version of Android, then who's going to
Yeah,
use it,
but
who's going to
and
not.
again, like even with it being something that they can push an update through with messages, that only helps the people that use messages, which is not most Android
Yes.
users. Um,
Although it is becoming most, I will say, since switching to messages and using RCS, I am surprised by the number of people I know that are on Android. So factoring out the people I know that are on iOS, but just the people that are using Android, it's probably
well,
about 85-90% of the people I
a
communicate
lot of
with.
Samsung phones, the built-in Samsung app supports RCS, especially on T-Mobile. Um,
It doesn't through the Google Messages app, though, as far as I understand.
I'm pretty sure it does.
Like, so sorry, I should rephrase. I think it does on T-Mobile
Yeah.
Google Messages to the Samsung app, but not between carriers, whereas Messages can currently function between
Mhm.
carriers. Now, I think some of the newer Samsung devices are being shipped with the stock Google Messages app. It's something they're trying to force. I think. I could be wrong, but
Yeah. And I mean, like that'll work for some carriers, but like Verizon, for example, likes to try and force down, their messaging app down people's throats.
oh, they
Um,
absolutely do, and they've had essentially their own version of RCS for about 3 years now. But it sucks, in my opinion.
yeah,
Like it needs to be carrier agnostic for
yeah.
sure.
I do think it'll eventually get better, and like again, there will be some things that they can push through more easily. Like for example, if they ever wanted to increase the amount of data that can be sent, so even larger photos or even larger videos, higher res video,
Hmm.
that's something that they can just push through, and then if your app supports it, you get it. If not, it can downgrade it on the network end or something. Um, those
Yeah,
types of things are much easier to do than something like inline replies. So it's going to be very feature
yeah.
specific.
Which, by the way, by default, RCS supports 100 megabyte
Yeah,
delivery, so that's pretty cool. Like there's no photo big
yeah.
enough really that you could take on
Videos
any
mostly is
phone
what
that
I'm
wouldn't
getting
send,
at.
but
Yeah,
video is the only. Yeah, yeah.
like it'd be very nice to eventually just be able to text someone a full 4K video.
Oh, that'd be so
Yeah,
nice. Yeah, and that's the other thing is having stuff that's having high end messaging functionality that's tied to a phone number is a big deal as
hmm
well. And by the way, I was able to correct myself here. The S20 Ultra, I'm looking at screenshots of its home screen, and the app is definitely not messages
yeah,
from Google. It's definitely their own. However, I know people that have the S20 Ultra, and it does default to RCS. T-Mobile, people that are on T-Mobile, it defaults to
yeah.
RCS,
No,
so that's
I
kind of
like I
nice.
know Samsung's apps on T-Mobile have defaulted to RCS for a while. The
Yes,
issue is
yes.
just like if they want to make some kind of bigger change to RCS, getting Samsung to update their app, and that only applying to phones that came out in the last year and a half is going to kind of be shitty.
That's
So
going to be really shitty, yeah. And I mean, I don't know. RCS is still in a bit of a limbo state. Google needs to push harder, I think, and they've started to. Because like I don't even fully understand if it works, cross carrier. I know T-Mobile supports cross carrier RCS, but do the other carriers, and to what extent? And then, obviously with T-Mobile, it's really simple. Like anybody on T-Mobile that's using the Samsung messaging app or the Google messaging app that has RCS enabled, which it is by default, uses RCS across T-Mobile. That's period. And we just need the other carriers to really properly get on board
yeah.
with it.
So the
Yeah.
next big thing that's on all of them is some changes to privacy updates. So for one, and this is really nice because there's a lot of concerns about apps like accessing cameras or microphones and like recording people when they're not paying attention. People always are concerned, like with Facebook, for example, how their ads can be very creepy and that it's something that you've talked about but not like looked up, and they can still advertise to you.
And it happens too much where it's like it just doesn't seem possible that there's that it's not that.
Yeah, it's very, very weird. Well, with iOS 14, they have an indicator now that automatically comes up. There is no way around it from an app development standpoint that we know of, where it just automatically comes up on your screen up in the top, with a yellow icon if the microphone is active and a green icon if the camera is active. And
And that's really
it comes
nice.
up as soon as the camera activates. For example, one of the things that they used as an example in a video that I had watched was they used I think it was Instagram, where you can swipe over to the side to pull up the camera, and as
Yeah.
soon as you like swiped over enough that Instagram was triggering the camera, the icon came up. And so they know that that
Okay.
was working as intended right away. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. There's no
yeah,
delay.
so that's very nice.
Um.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that I'm glad they've added this because Android's actually had this for a while. If you've had an updated version of Android, any app other than the camera app, if it's using your camera or your microphone, it shows a notification at the top of your screen that that's
Yeah.
happening.
Um,
And I think it's
Yeah,
important.
it's very important. And then the next thing that they changed was they're changing how permissions for photos works. So right now, the way it works is what you would expect of you grant the app permission to view your photos or not. That's
Yeah.
pretty much it. What they are doing is they are changing it so that you have a full photos access or a limited access in which you can select which photos it has access to, whether you select specific
Like
folders, or
folders.
you just I believe you can even just like hit OK, select the photos you want to give it, and it only gives it that. as well.
That's really nice. Permissions is an incredibly important thing, and I feel like Android's been pretty good about that in recent times. I think Windows could maybe have a little bit of work done
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Just really complex permissions is important, and that's
And
something
making
that
them very,
um,
upfront and, like, prompting people in a good way that's, like, clear and concise is very important, and
yes,
you don't
and
need
that's what I was gonna
description
say.
at
Apple's
all.
doing better
Yeah.
here. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because like Android does have really good permissions, but it's not exactly user friendly. Linux and FreeBSD both, of course, have great permissions, but that's very unuser friendly. And I think it's important to add a level of user friendliness to this, and that means partially not just calling it permissions, but like making it really GUI based, simple to do.
Yeah, and another thing about permissions, I wasn't really gonna talk about this, but it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about how iOS makes them more prominent. So,
Uh huh.
in the App Store on Android, you can view what app, permissions are requested by that app before you download it, but you have to go into the, like, information section of the app and then click on the permissions. It's not something that's front and center when you're looking at the app. Um, and iOS
Yeah.
has never had where you could preview the permissions beforehand at all. There wasn't like a hidden menu or anything. But what they're doing now is they're doing something where in the App Store's like feed, before you even get to the information section, like above where it would show how large the app is or anything like that, it shows the permissions in a very easily digestible way, and it'll specify like for location, for example, one of the new features is that you can choose to grant precise location versus general location. Well, if an app only ever is going to request general location, then it'll show that in here. Um,
And like for like a lot of weather apps, for example, general's
yeah.
fine. Yeah.
And so it's built into the App Store, and it's like frontline and center where it's not a menu deep where you can view
Yeah.
permissions are going to be requested by that app. And the other thing is that Android's permission system is so complicated, but it's not something that you can, for most apps, deny. It's you accept the permissions or you don't use the app. For a
Yeah, and I mean, aside from microphone,
yeah,
camera, storage, I mean, it does ask for those now, and Android's gotten a lot better at
yeah,
that. With like they've copied iOS in a good way of allow while using app versus allow all the time for
mhm,
permissions. But location, having this fine-tuned location access is really nice. And I'm actually pulling up an Android app right now just to look at the permissions, and it is a little more difficult to find than it should be. And so I kind of hope that, like, I appreciate that it shows like in-app purchases and contains ads front and center, but I would like more information about things like permissions front and center as
yeah.
well.
Like I had to, because I wasn't sure. I had remembered at some point seeing permissions within the App Store, but I didn't remember where it was. And so I went to
Uh-huh.
the Google Play Store on the website to validate that when I was looking through all this and when Apple had initially announced it, and I was like, wow, that's really like not something that most, I mean, unless you're already a permission hawk, it's not something you're ever going to think of. It's so deep in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that Apple is, in a way, they've been for a while now, and this helps, but they're doing a good job of making people into more permission conscious people.
Yeah, and I think that's also important is people to realize what's
Yeah.
going on the
Like
internet and on their
if you
devices.
know
So,
what all an app is collecting and you just don't care, that's fine. That's your choice.
yeah,
But
but you need to be
yeah.
aware.
So the other thing that they are changing is they've had sign in with Apple for a while now, but the issue is that if you had an existing account, you couldn't convert it over to sign in with Apple. They are
Mm.
finally adding that ability where websites will be able to offer you a conversion to sign in with Apple.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
which is nice because
That's
like
cool.
for me, I've been trying to move away from Google services. There's some things that I want to keep using on Google, and some things that I
Yeah.
would like to not have tied in with Google. And like I use sign in with Google a lot because that's what I had used before, and it's nice to
Right,
be able
right.
to kind of just um, transition my account so that Google stops getting new data. And Apple doesn't get any data from the sign in with Apple other than that you signed into that app.
Yeah,
So
yeah, they're better about that kind of
yeah.
control.
Well, since
The
they're
thing
not
I
trying to
will
make
say is
money
I
off
still
of your information, they just don't need that info. It's a cost for them rather
yeah.
than a benefit.
Right, right, right. And I mean, from a security standpoint and being a security researcher myself, my preference is still every single account that I have is completely individually separate and using its own 16-digit randomized password. But that's just not convenient for people. I mean, with LastPass, it's pretty convenient, but
Yeah,
like,
and I mean,
and other password
it depends
managers,
on the
but
app. Like, I don't
it's
use this for anything important. But
yeah,
like, if
yeah.
I'm just
Because like obviously, if somebody breaches your Apple account somehow, whether there's a flaw or whether you just don't configure your privacy enough, which like you do
yeah,
obviously, but maybe a normal user misses something, that could potentially grant them access to a lot of things. Um, but yeah, as long as you're aware of it, and I think if you do a good job of keeping your Apple account secure, then it's okay.
yeah,
And with Google the same way too. Obviously, there's the privacy of they collect data on you. But the sign in with Google features, like Google is really good about making great security convenient as
yeah.
well. That's something they've been good at. As simple as for a lot of people, hitting yes on your phone to sign
Mhm.
in, and in some instances having essentially a passwordless Google.
Yeah. Um, okay, so that's it for privacy. There's a FaceTime updates that they added. So they added picture-in-picture, which is nice. They improved the quality up to I think it's 1080p now instead of 720p, which is great. Um,
Yeah.
but for me, the most important change, even though it's not something I'm ever, I mean, it might come in handy in chats that I'm in, but it's not something that I personally need to take advantage of. Um,
Hmm.
so everyone's used to with video chat apps where it will make the person speaking the prominent person in the video chat. The issue for certain people is that if you're using sign language to communicate rather than speaking, it's never going to be able
Mm.
to make you the prominent person. And what they have done with FaceTime is they've actually added in sign language detection. And so if it detects somebody using sign language, it will make them the prominent person always while they're using sign language.
So that's really cool. My question is it going to detect me doing this as sign language? That's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it works in reality.
We'll have to see how
Yeah.
accurate it is, and I mean that from a person like I talk with my
My
hands, right?
assumption is
um,
that they are running something that specifically looks for like multiple actual sign language gestures in a row.
probably, yeah, and probably ones that are more
Yeah.
common, specific ones. Yeah.
We'll see how it works, but it's one of those features that like is so helpful for the people that need it. It's just nice to see.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, even just trying is
Yeah.
really good.
And then let's move on um to the iOS 14 specific updates. Um so um this is actually on both, but there's a reason, and I'll explain in the iPad portion why I'm splitting this up. Widgets. Um, widgets
Yes,
are coming to iOS. Now that's a really big deal.
they are.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, no, no, right. I'm saying like yeah, they are, and I mean
Um,
that's great and all. If you see my phone here, there's a widget here, and I've had that widget for like the ability to
uh,
do that for about a
yeah,
decade.
and you know what else? macOS has also had that ability for like more than a decade.
Yeah,
It's
so like it's
it's not
about
even
time to
copying
get it on
Android. It's
iOS.
for one, visually, it's copying Windows Phone.
It is, yeah.
Because, like,
I mean,
Windows Phone had for their live tiles, it had 3 sizes. This has 3 sizes. Uh,
so is it full? I can't remember the sizes. Is it just full width and then like four apps worth and then one app worth,
so the
or
small version is 2 by 2. Now, as a side note for the 2 by 2 size, it is not specifically interactable. And so what that means is like it'll be more of an informational
okay,
display, but if you click on it, it just launches you into the app. And
okay,
then there is the medium size, which is 2 by 4, and this is the normal interactable one that you would expect, just like a wide widget on Android. So if you have a music
okay,
widget, you can control playback. If you have, um, something, like I was gonna say Google shortcuts, Apple shortcuts widget,
uh
you can interact with those shortcuts via the widget, things like that. Um,
now the 2x2s though are still stackable, right?
yes, I'll explain the
Okay,
stackable in a second, but yes,
yeah,
so
yeah. I figured. I just wasn't sure if
Um,
those were included.
so, yeah, it's just pretty much that you can't like add buttons to it that you would interact with in that size. Um,
Okay,
and
okay,
then now the widget can launch you into um a specific page based on the widget that you choose, from my understanding, rather than it just
okay,
opening the app like the icon would. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also a large size, which is, I believe it's 4x4.
Okay,
So,
that's nice. Pretty
um,
big widgets then at that point,
yeah.
yeah.
And then the other really cool thing that they're doing with the widgets, and for me, this is actually much more helpful because initially with widgets, I'm like, oh, cool. I might use a couple of them, but it's not really that big of a deal for me because when I used Android, I actually didn't use widgets a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Because I found that for me to use widgets the way that I would want to, I would have to have, either a bunch of really small widgets, which I just didn't like the look of, or I'd have to have like entire pages taken up. Um,
Right,
but they are
yeah.
adding stackable widgets. So you can actually both do this manually, where you can, um, put a widget on your home screen and then grab another widget of the same size and stack it on top and stack another one on top. And you can have 4, 5, 6, however many you need. I don't know what the limit is. I'm sure there is some limit.
It's probably 5 is my random guess, because 3 takes up a good amount of the
Based based
the
on
like
the smart
sizing.
stack part, which I'll talk about in a second, I think it's going to be more than 5 because I'm pretty sure I saw
Okay.
smart stacks with more than 5.
Okay.
Um, But so for me, the stackable widgets on their own changes things because one of the examples that I want out of widgets is quick access to balance of like my, just general account with my different bank accounts. And
Yeah.
on Android, I had done that for a while, but I didn't like having a page taken up with, this bank and this bank and this card and then my like stocks on top of that.
Right.
Whereas,
Well, and it would take up a lot of space for you since you have so many millions of dollars. And so like then it just becomes this huge number, right?
yes, that's how
So
it
then it's
works. Is
like
it's more widgets per zero. No, it's just like I liked having that quick access to my information, and now I can have a stack that has my my Robinhood stocks, my bank account one, my bank account two, and it only takes up
yeah.
one 2x4 spot, and I can just swipe through
Yeah.
them. So
And
that's
I think Google's going to copy
oh
that.
for sure,
Yeah, because
for
like
sure.
realistically as a programmer, you can do that as an individual widget on Android, obviously, but but it would only be a widget for that app. So you would have to like install an app that is a widget specifically that links to other
Yeah.
apps to do it
The
on Android
one
right
issue
now.
that Android's going to run into when they do copy it is it's going to
Mhm.
look terrible because widgets are not consistent on Android. You can a lot of widgets are,
Yeah.
boxes, but there's also a lot of widgets that aren't.
Yeah, and widgets are super resizable. As we know, like one of the benefits of Android is having, the ability to size literally
Yeah.
anything anywhere you want. And if you're using a custom launcher, you can have apps in positions that are half
Mhm.
positions and stuff.
And
And so that's going to add
getting into
complication.
that, I think that we're going to see launchers copy that within a couple months, whereas it's going to be years before Android has it in a refined way that you would expect an actual
I
OS
bet,
integration to be.
yeah, I bet Nova Launcher is going to be the first to grab
It's either
adoption
going to
of
be
it. I
Nova
bet they
Launcher
are.
or I can't remember the name of the launcher that I used. It wasn't Nova, but there was another really good launcher.
There's been a few good ones,
Oh
so I don't know
crap.
which it would be. Nova Launcher is kind of the go-to for me. I've tried Microsoft Launcher; it is actually really nice, so it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to copy it as well. But I definitely, I like the idea of it, and I think this is a good implementation. And Android will probably eventually have a bubble system where, like, if you stack widgets, those widgets have to specifically support stacking, and they like for widgets that you can have all these different shapes and sizes of, they'll be like, okay, if you're gonna stack it, the widget has to default to a specific sizing and design,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you could have like, oh, this widget can look all wonky unless you put it in a stack, then it uses a different
hmm
styling.
Action Launcher was the one that I was thinking of.
Oh yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
one, that one. I
Because
found Nova better, but
yeah,
yeah, Action was a
Action
really good
Launcher
one.
was from what I remember the first one to integrate the ability to have widgets that are you swipe up on the icon to pull up the widget, for example.
Yes,
They were the
yes.
first ones to
Action
do.
Launcher, in my opinion, was better than Nova for a while. Actually, they were adding a lot of cool
Yeah.
stuff like that.
And so like I feel like just from what I've seen from that dev, he's more likely to just be like, "Oh yeah, I'll just make it work however it looks." Um,
Yeah,
and I mean
yeah,
that's really what you're gonna need for Android for a while because like iOS widgets are a
hmm
very consistent design style of it has this
yeah,
box. Everything within the box can change, but it's this box. And so it's really
yeah,
easy to
yeah.
make them stack.
And that's one of the both ups and downs of both platforms. Is like it's nice on Android to have the
Mhm.
flexibility, and it's nice that there's the ability to do custom launchers. So something like this could be added as early as tomorrow. But then also the ability for iOS to do it in such a consistent manner.
It allows them to
There's
easily
there's
do the
positives and
stackable
negatives to
features,
both.
yeah.
Right, right. And like Android could easily do it with a custom launcher. In fact, they could have already done it. I don't even see that being that much programming, but it's just not going to be as smooth and pretty.
Yeah, and it's gonna be one of those things where it's like only power users are gonna wanna use it because it's gonna be visually a little bit jarring.
Right.
Whereas
Well, and compatibility. Some apps, like some widgets, let you
yeah,
scroll.
that's also true.
So like that could be a
Yeah.
problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas like this is gonna be one of those things where I think Smart Stack, which I'll talk about in just a second, I think that's gonna be something a lot of people want to use on Android or on iPhone. So
Yes.
as for this
Yes.
smart stack that we've been mentioning a little bit here and there, what this is it's a stack of widgets that you can just drag out a smart stack, and it will curate widgets based on the apps that you use, and it tries to have like a priority system so that, and this is both a mixture of learning how you use your phone, and also app developers can give like an indicator to the OS as to when it thinks that it should be the prominent widget. But it's essentially the stack of widgets, but it just shows you whichever one the OS it thinks is the most pertinent to you at the time. Um,
Now, is there a way to manually do it though? Is there a way to be like, oh, I want this widget to show at 6 a.m., this widget to show at 8
no,
a.m.? Is there any kind of manual
no,
ability there? Okay, no. Okay.
no. That and at that point, that wouldn't be a smart stack. That would just be programming stacks. Um,
It would be, yeah,
um,
yeah. I bet you Android's gonna have that ability when Google finally gets
Yeah, for
this
sure.
functional. But
But
yeah.
the idea and the goal of Smart Stack, and I doubt it'll be like this in iOS 14, but I'm sure it will eventually get there, is that especially if there's anything that you consistently want to be the prominent thing, it will be the prominent thing at
Mm-hmm.
that time. It'll eventually get good enough, whether it's that you manually keep going to the same one at that time, and it'll just
Right.
eventually learn, oh, you've gone to this every day at 6. We know that this should be the one we show you at 6.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually it'll learn that. Um, and then what's all
Yeah, that's not too hard of a thing for it to do
no.
either. That
And
makes
then what's
sense. Yeah.
also nice is that any stack that you manually create, you can enable the smart stack feature on. And so rather than the general smart stack being just any widgets that it thinks are relevant based on your usage, you can make
Right.
you can make a stack of, I'll use my financial one for example, of my financial one, and if I consistently want to check stocks at bell open and bell close, eventually it'll learn to show me my Robinhood just overall amount, or the stocks apps, stocks that I have selected in that widget at the time that that would happen, but it'll then
Yeah.
at other times just show me my balance. And so you
Yeah.
can have your manually curated stacks be smart, or you can have the general smart stack widget switch between its choice of widgets.
Yeah. And that
So
makes sense. And I think it's a cool feature. I think in some ways widgets on iOS right now are better than Android. I do think Google's going to get real hard on that pretty quick because that's been a big arguing point for Android for a long time.
I also think
And
that
so
this is
they,
going
yeah,
to, in some ways, improve widgets on Android, because a lot of
yeah.
developers kind of built widgets a long time ago and just kind of forgot about them. They don't. It's not the
Oh,
type
yeah.
of
A lot of them are
thing.
half-assed and
Yeah,
ugly.
well, I
Yeah.
mean, even then, it's not even necessarily half-assed. A lot of them were built 3, 4, 5 years ago and just never updated, and so they were built well for the time, but things have changed, and
Yeah.
they haven't
Hmm.
had reason to go back. Whereas now, every app development team, obviously, for bigger companies, they have separate teams for iOS versus Android, but a lot of people
Yeah.
are now going to have to go back and look at how do they want their widgets to work, and if they're already reevaluating or newly evaluating iOS widgets, they might as well take that idea of what they think is the good user experience now and just bring it to Android. They're already
Yeah.
taking the time
No,
to
I
put in
agree.
that
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
and work, so then they just have to do the coding.
Yeah. I mean, they've already got the graphics files
Yeah,
and stuff that are going to be pretty similar at
yeah.
least. So, and this is continuing to go down the list of, oh, take a feature from Android, kind of make it Apple like, and doing that enough. Again, like, I mean, I'm gonna knock them because yeah, Android's had widgets for like a decade, but at the same time, like these are the kinds of things that start to make somebody that is a pretty heavy power Android user um, even have any kind of consideration towards going to
Mhm.
iOS, right? Like some of these additions are like, okay, I kind of almost like I have considered it. There are things holding me back still, but like this is definitely in the right
Mhm.
direction.
Um, and then so that's really it for widgets on iOS 14 in specific. The next thing I want to talk about for iPhone is it's actually an accessibility feature, although this is just going to be a power user feature more than accessibility. So they are adding in double and triple tapping the back of your iPhone to do certain actions. And it's not like certain actions that Apple chooses. It's like it can tie into shortcuts. And so you can pretty much do whatever you want with that shortcuts let you do,
Yeah.
which is a lot.
Oh
Because
yeah. Oh yeah. There's a ton of
for those
stuff.
that don't
I
know,
mean,
shortcuts can tie into apps that can run Python and JavaScript and other things. And so you can pretty much do whatever you want with a double tap of your phone that doesn't break Apple's rules.
yep. And like, I mean, honestly, like, you could have your lights in your house turn on with a double tap, turn off with a
Oh
triple
yeah,
tap. Like
if you
all kinds
if
of
you
cool
hate
stuff.
Siri and you want Google Assistant and that's for some reason been like a reason to hold off on getting an iPhone, you will
Yep.
literally, and Marquez has a video on his YouTube or on his Twitter, so you can go look at this in action. You can literally just double tap the back of your iPhone and it will launch Google Assistant if you set that up.
Yeah. And this kind of plays into a theme that I feel like we've been seeing in iOS and iPadOS more so than macOS, but power user features that are hidden away from regular users so that it's not like it's giving people the ability to do things that Apple doesn't really want you to do, but you can only do them if you know what you're
Yeah,
doing.
this is
And that's cool.
yeah, we'll talk more about power user stuff at the end because I have a point I wanted to make about that, but I think it kind of sums up a lot of things. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, Apple's been doing a lot for power users and it's very interesting. Um,
And yeah, and they keep doing it through things like
yeah,
accessibility and stuff, which
or
is
shortcuts,
hides it
which is
away.
not something that's necessarily front and center for everyone either.
Oh yeah,
Um,
you could probably ask iPhone users, and probably 75% of them don't use shortcuts and maybe don't even know what it
yeah, I
is.
mean, like they might see it because
Like,
when
yeah,
shortcuts first became so for those that don't know, shortcuts was not originally made by Apple, which is actually why it has features that
yeah,
Apple would never add. Um, but it was something that was an existing app that Apple bought and just pretty much
yeah.
integrated into the OS in a more in-depth way. So it'd be like if Google decided to buy Tasker and make it a core part of Android.
Android has had Tasker and IFTTT for a long time, though.
I know, but iOS also
Yeah,
had shortcuts via this other app for a while. What I'm talking about is
yeah,
if they bought it and integrated it into the OS, which
yeah.
they
Right,
don't
right.
really
That
need
actually
to
reminds me too. I
because,
need to set up
yeah,
Tasker.
they don't really need to because Android apps have more control by default, and so they don't need OS
Yeah.
integration. But it would be like if Google decided to specifically go out of their way to add features for Tasker.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I feel like they just aren't because it's a lot of development time when something like IFTTT is really user
yeah,
friendly and is easy to
yeah.
use.
So the next big change to iOS is the app library. So this is very Android-like in some ways and not at all Android-like in others. So
Yeah,
you can hide apps from your home screen now, which is very Android-like. You don't have to have everything on the screen. However,
yeah,
it's not just a list of all of your apps. It's iOS's category system is how the app library works, and there is no as of right now. This may change before launch, but as of right now, there is no you picking which categories they go in. It's these apps go into this category. Deal with it.
it's interesting, and that makes it Apple like
Yeah.
for
Now
sure.
for me, and we've talked about this off the podcast, but like I already like don't really care. Like I like the ability to hide the apps. I don't really care how this launcher is configured or the library is configured
Mm-hmm.
because when I want to use an app that is not front and center, I don't go find it on my home screen anyway. On iOS, for those that don't use iPhone, if you want to search for an app, you just pull down. So for
Yeah,
me,
right, right,
I
yeah,
just pull down, type in the app name, and launch the app. It's faster than finding it. It's faster than going into the app launcher. This is how I did it on Android as well. I specifically in Action Launcher set up so that swipe down did an app search. Um,
Uh-huh.
and it's just a much more efficient way than trying to scroll through a list.
It is, yeah, and I use that all the time too on Android. It's like either using Google Assistant or using search
Hmm.
to pull up an app, and so just the ability to hide them is a great
Yes.
benefit. Now I personally still like the home screen being able to be organized the way Android organizes it, but where you can
Hmm.
make shapes with your apps and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see the ability to hide stuff because every person that I know with an iPhone that I work on, right? And I do IT, so I do work on iPhones, is either they have 100 pages of
Hmm.
apps or they have that one folder, if they're a slightly more power user, that has 100 pages of
Yes.
apps. And I'm just
Um,
like,
Now, one other thing that ties into this app library and hiding apps that is really nice, and I think it's something that most people won't need, but the people that use their phone heavily for work, but are also trying to um, disconnect from work when they're not working, especially in a work from home scenario where you kind of are always in work mode. This is really
yeah.
cool. So you can hide entire homepages, and they don't delete them. They don't move them to the app library and just like they're gone. It's you can just turn them off and then turn them back on by just going into wiggle mode and then like pressing one button to turn off the page.
Wiggle
Yes,
mode.
I love that that's just what we're going with now.
That's the official name
Yeah.
now. Now let me ask you this: when you do hide it, does it are those apps available in the
So
launcher, or are they
all apps
completely
are
hidden?
always in
Period.
the launcher at all times.
Okay, so that's like Android then.
Yes.
Okay, okay,
Um,
okay.
and so when you hide the homepage, it just hides the homepage. So you can have a work email widget and your work related apps on a dedicated, let's say you have it on your second page normally, so that it's
Yeah.
separate from your main homepage, but then just, oh, okay, I'm off work, I want to be not in work mode, I don't want to have this stuff readily visible to me, I'm just going to press
Mhm.
a couple buttons and turn the page off.
And I could see them potentially trying to automate this in the future for people too.
Yeah, I could see them adding something
Yeah.
into shortcuts that would allow you to
Yep.
have it be time based where that page gets enabled and disabled. Um,
Like per your work schedule or
the
whatever.
the
Yeah.
one thing with that is I almost feel like if based on Apple, if they were to do that, they would not actually tie it into the Shortcuts app, but rather have a setting somewhere that specifically enables and disables it at certain times and not do much more. Because the
Yeah.
issue again with how Apple thinks about things and with how this would work if it tied into shortcuts is that theoretically another app could then have control over when your home screen is visible.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and that could be
Yeah,
dangerous.
it's something that, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, it probably wouldn't get abused often, but it could be, and if it did, it would be a big problem. So it's something Apple would just
Yeah.
avoid.
Yeah, and I could see them just tying it into a time thing or tying it into calendar somehow.
Yes.
One of those two things.
And
Yeah.
then the next thing, so iPhone is getting picture-in-picture video. iPad has already had this for a while, but it's coming to iPhone finally. It's resizable. It's what you would expect. You launch a video in full screen, you go home, the video just moves out. Unfortunately, because of the way that Google is in paywalling YouTube videos from being able to be
Yeah.
picture in picture, and the way that Apple is in that they don't allow OS features to be paywalled. Um, this will not happen on the YouTube Android or the YouTube iOS app anytime soon. However, Safari and I believe Firefox on iPad can
Firefox, yes. Yes.
can launch the YouTube video into picture in picture, and so that'll just work on iPhone as well. I'm sure that the
Yeah, yeah.
Firefox iPhone app will need to be updated to do it, but they'll be able to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, as long as WebKit supports it, and obviously it will. And the other thing I want to mention about Firefox, and I know Safari can do this as well, is it's not just YouTube. It's any video you're
Yeah,
playing.
I
So like, if you're
specified
watching something
YouTube
on like
because YouTube is the one where
because it's the
the
restrictive
app
one.
doesn't
Yeah,
have it
yeah,
built in.
yeah. Right, right.
Um,
That makes sense.
and what's really cool too, though, about the picture-in-picture video, this is my favorite feature. You can hide the video completely and just have the audio playing.
So like Android.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, for picture-in-picture, like, yeah, sure, that's cool, but like I feel like for me, Most of the time that I want to, at least when I'm using a mobile device, most of the time that I like a phone specifically, not a tablet, that I
Yeah,
want
yeah, yeah.
to have the audio playing, I'm generally doing other stuff. And so like it's fine to have the picture in picture. Like I'll want that in a lot of cases. But if I'm doing other stuff, then there's going to be times where I want to hide it. And being able to just drag it off the screen, do my stuff, and then drag it back on very quickly is very nice and easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a key point and a big deal. Yeah.
And then the next feature that I wanted to talk about is car keys. This is what it sounds like. You will be able to use your iPhone as keys to unlock and to start your car. So the
Yeah.
way that this will work, for one, it's a specific singular BMW car to start. And the way that this will work
Yep.
initially is NFC. So just like how you can, use payments for stuff in store, for transit, you can use your phone to unlock dorm rooms, for example, via NFC. They're
Yeah.
just adding that tech for cars for now, but eventually, this is what's really cool. Eventually, cars are going to be shipping that can utilize the U1 chip that's seen in the newest model iPhones. And for those that don't know, this is like a specific type of chip that is supposed to be more location precise. The reason that Apple put this in there primarily is for improving Find My iPhone and for when they
Yeah.
eventually release their rumored tile competitor, which will be like little tags, and they can
Mm-hmm.
they're just much more location precise chips that are also very short distances. And so eventually cars are going to be coming out that will be able to detect that the iPhone is just like your key fob for your car in your car, at which point
Yeah, so you just get up, walk up, open the door, get
and then
in, and
start it. Yeah.
it's ready.
And it'll work even
Yeah,
if it's in your
yeah,
gym bag in the back of the car or whatever. Just
yeah.
as long as it is in the vehicle, it should be able to start it. Um,
Right. Well, and then to go further, electric vehicles, a lot of them, you can set them up to, like, you don't have to press a button to start
yeah,
either, right? So you would just walk up, get in, buckle, and press the gas, and
yes,
you're good
that
to
yeah,
go.
and without having to
So it's a
carry your
great
fob
idea.
too.
Yeah, yeah. And now the one thing I will say, well, a couple things here is the first thing I will say is I'm sure security, obviously, especially as a security person, is the first concern I have with it. But I've seen people complaining about how this is only for a specific model of a specific BMW. But actually, it's great to be starting on one
Yeah.
car
Well, and then also
because if they come across security
part of the reason it's
problems,
like that is that initially to start your car, obviously you have to tap to get in the door, but then you have to place it on this specific model BMW has a Qi charger for your phone, and you
yeah,
have to actually place the iPhone on the Qi charger in order to start the car. And so it's like a
and
very
yeah,
specific location too, because it's not just the chip.
yeah.
So
So we'll just have to see, what possible security issues come into play with it, but NFC doesn't have a horrible track record of security
yeah,
necessarily.
it's one of
So,
those things where it's like people
um,
have to get in contact with you to take the data pretty much. Like they have
yeah,
to get in close
yeah,
enough proximity,
yeah,
or they've
right,
they've like at least bumped you. Whereas with the
yeah,
U1 sensor, they do have to get relatively close, but it can be a foot or two away. Um,
yeah, and that's what I was more so going at was the U1 is the one that I have a little bit more concern about, but we just there are ways around it, right? I mean, is it is it much worse than your fob,
yeah,
right?
that's what I was
Like
gonna get at
that's
too,
the
is because
thing.
it's like you know these things are going to be concerns, and there will. I have no doubt there's going to be a car stolen because someone figured out how to get through the U1 chip security. However,
Yeah,
that is not a widespread problem. There is not, with fobs, there are security issues and people are able to bypass the fobs or steal the data for the fobs. But it's not
yeah,
something that's happening where it's like a mass problem. And, um, it's not going to be like that with the iPhone. Like, I highly doubt that there's going to be something that's so easy to take advantage of that just people's cars are getting jacked left and right.
yeah,
At which
yeah.
point,
The only concern I have is if something serious does come out. As we know, aside from Tesla, most of these car companies don't do updates very often.
yes, but they don't need to. Because the thing is that with the way that the iPhone's lock system works, you can just revoke the permission for the car.
Oh,
And
that's a
so
good point. Yeah.
you can, and I actually from my understanding too, part of the security, because it's tying into the ability to revoke the permission, is that it has to connect and authenticate with Apple's servers. And so it can't be a
Mm-hmm.
skimming device. It would have to be another iPhone. And it would have to be another iPhone that
Right.
would have to have access to your account. So they would have to compromise your account, get close to your phone, and presumably be on a jailbroken iPhone. Which
Yeah.
Apple
Yeah.
probably
That
will
makes
build
sense.
into the car key system some kind of jailbreak validation and just make it not work if it's jailbroken. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that
Which is
alone,
gonna suck for some
yeah,
people.
that alone
But
can
yeah.
at least cover the like someone buying a vulnerability and taking advantage of it type thing. It can stop those.
Right.
Yes, sure. Security researchers will no doubt find a way to steal cars with this. And I'm sure there will be cars actually stolen with this. But it is going to be
Yeah.
extremely uncommon, and it's probably easier to lift someone's keys than it is to lift someone's phone and unlock it. And it's probably easier to lift someone's keys out of their pocket than it is to go through all of this process.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. So that's what really matters is you make it harder than the other method,
Yeah.
then it's
And
not
like
gonna
if your
be
phone's
targeted.
stolen, you can remote wipe it, you can revoke access.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of ways that you can make it so that your phone cannot be used to unlock the car. Um, the
Yeah.
other concern that would come up for a lot of people about this is if your phone's battery dies. iOS or iPhones have already had a feature for several years now where they actually reserve a small amount of the battery and they die like a percent or two early. And the reason they do that is if you have NFC payments enabled for transit, or if you have NFC enabled for unlocking dorm rooms, um, that you can still get in. So they reserve.
And it works even with it powered off, right? Like even when it's shut down, or do you have to turn it back on?
No, so like when it dies, it doesn't die. It goes
Yeah.
into this mode. It
Okay,
it
okay. That's what I was asking is I wasn't sure if it dies with a couple percent and then you can turn it
No, no,
back
no, no,
on to
no.
do
It
these things.
so
It just
yes,
does
so
it.
it dies like
Okay.
an Android phone would die, but instead of like on an Android phone when it dies, it leaves enough battery to show you that it's dead, like it to turn the screen on and
Yeah.
show that. On iPhone, it does that
Yeah.
too. It just saves enough that it also has some time in this power reserve for it to power the NFC chip, which is obviously not a lot, to do specifically
Yeah. Yeah,
transit
that's
payments. You
nothing.
can't do like you can't do payments in store because you have to Face ID authenticate those, or Touch ID
Yeah.
authenticate those. But you
Right.
can
But you don't want to get locked out of your car, your house,
correct.
or being able to go
Yeah,
home.
and with iOS 14, they reserve enough that it works for 5 hours. So your phone can die, and 4 hours later, you can still get into your car.
Okay, that's
That
that's good.
that pretty
That's a
much
good.
solves the case. There's
And I mean,
not,
everybody has chargers, so like if it does somehow become 5 hours later,
yeah,
like just go charge your phone in the
yeah.
store, for
But
five
it's like it's
minutes.
one of those things where it's like, how many circumstances are there where you know, most people, their phone's not going to die before they would get back to their car anyway. But if that happens,
Yeah,
it might be, oh, my phone died, let's say at a concert or something. I finished the concert and went back. That's an hour or two later, not 5.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, and even longer concerts, you don't see them go
and
5.
and
Yeah,
even then, you
most
wouldn't
stuff. Yeah,
generally go to the concert with your phone dead. It would
right,
die
right,
during
exactly.
the
Yeah, yeah.
process.
Yeah, during a concert, during a movie,
Yeah,
during a conference or something like WWDC in person, if that ever happens
yeah.
again.
Um,
So yeah, yeah, it's cool.
And then the next feature that this comes from Android, but I have no doubt that it will actually get used unlike Android. Um, and so Apple calls this app clips. So Google implemented something a while ago in Android where you could essentially launch single page views of an app. Um,
Yeah, they call them progressive web
yeah.
apps, I believe.
Um, uh,
Unless that's
no,
Windows,
I
I
think
can't
that's
remember.
something different. So yeah, it's app preview is what they called it on Android. And so like when we had tried Allo, this is something that came up where you could send somebody an Allo message, and if they didn't have Allo installed, but they had a new enough Android phone, it could essentially download enough that they could respond to that, and then it would just go away.
And we knew somebody that used that exclusively.
Yes, yeah, it was silly.
That
Um,
yeah, I mean Allo was silly, but it was also silly to just use the web app and never install it. Just use it when they get
yeah.
messages.
Um,
I thought that was funny. It
um,
was it was great though. I mean, it was cool to see it working,
Yeah, but with that, so the app previews were something that, any app could have taken advantage of. And you could have seen, for example, with the scooters that have popped up, they make it so that there's like a preview app that it just temporarily downloads. You do what you need to unlock the scooter and you go on. A number of
Yeah.
issues with that, though, is that the way that app previews worked on Android, it would be quite an intricate process to go in and do something that requires payment, for example. Really,
Mm-hmm.
app previews were more designed to, like, let's say, even though this never was implemented, I'll use Etsy as an example. Um, Launch, let's say, if you wanted to launch like a 3D model within Etsy of a product, which I don't even know if that's actually a
Yeah.
thing, but just as an example, you want to launch a 3D model from a store of a product. And this was before 3D models were more built into Chrome and more able to run easily. Um, you would be able to download like a single page version of that app, preview the app, do what you need to check that out, and then leave the app,
Mm-hmm.
buy it from the website, whatever.
Yeah, and I feel like the other use was almost like just an app introduction.
Mhm.
Like, oh hey, you don't have Allo, but if I message you and you don't have Allo, it'll be like, hey, look, you got a message on Allo, and you'll be like, oh, I want to install
Yeah, it
that.
was literally an app
So yeah,
preview. Whereas what
yeah,
Apple is doing is they are trying to solve a number of situations where you might need to use an app once and then never use it again, or once or twice. And so it doesn't make
yeah.
sense to install it, set up an account, tie your payment information in, or set up Apple Pay or whatever.
Deal with permission
Yeah.
settings and stuff, all the
And
stuff. Yeah,
so this is downloading mini versions of apps that are under 10 megabytes. And
yeah. So it'll be instant even on crappy
yeah,
connections.
and it will, the way that this works to launch is Apple made a new type of QR code specifically for this as an indicator, both that it's available for NFC tapping and to be scanned if you have like an older iPhone that doesn't have NFC. And
Yeah,
so there'll be a dedicated indicator to indicate that you can launch an app clip. You can launch the app clip and then you press open, or you can launch an app clip from a website. So again, using Etsy as an example, Etsy could,
mm-hmm.
instead of trying to have you sign in, let's say you're going to buy just one thing from Etsy. You're not planning on setting up an account and shopping with them regularly. You just want to buy something as a gift. You could
Yeah,
easily download a small version of Etsy that is just that product page and then the checkout screen. Something like
yeah,
that they could program in. Or Yelp could program in integration with like a small restaurant. So you go to the small restaurant's website, but then you check out through Yelp, Grubhub, any other service that might offer checkout,
yeah.
by just launching a mini version of that app as a one-time checkout. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
then the examples that Apple used as well. So they did use restaurants. They also used scooters. And then, and this is a really good example that I've run into that would have been nice is parking, specifically if you go to another city
Oh
where
man,
they don't
yeah.
use parking apps that you might use later. Um,
I've ran into that times where it'd be useful. I hated having to set up apps for various parking
yeah,
accounts. I mean, because I've had to park random places for work, and it's like, ugh.
yeah. And then to go back to what I had mentioned about app previews, where you kind of run into the issue of having to sign into accounts, having to set up payment or whatever, this
Yeah,
directly integrates with sign in for Apple. I haven't seen anything that indicates that sign in for Apple will be the only option. Just obviously that's what Apple talked about because they want people to use that.
yeah,
But you could have sign in
yeah,
with Apple, sign in with Google, whatever. Obviously, if you have sign in with Google, you have to have sign in with Apple. But
yeah.
um, they also are allowed to integrate with Apple Pay, and I don't think any Android app previews could integrate with Google Pay, and so that
I don't
immediately
think so
makes it
either.
more
Although
useful.
it'd be hard to know on Android because nobody uses them.
Exactly.
And that's the other thing is I agree with you. I think that Apple has the ecosystem that's able to push it.
Well,
That's one of the
I
advantages they
think
do
that
carry.
just making the QR code and NFC tag immediately makes it more likely to be used. Because there is now an
Agreed. Yeah,
easy
yeah.
way to tell consumers that don't have to really think about it that they can utilize this feature.
Yep, yep. And I think that's
That
perfect.
that right there shows like Apple definitely thinks things through more than Google when they eventually do it. They do things later, but they think them through.
Yeah, and sometimes I still don't like them as much. Sometimes they are still, not power user,
Yeah.
right? But that's fine.
Yeah.
like widgets, for example. aside from stackable widgets, I still like widgets better in
Mhm.
Android. I would like stackable to be possible. But you know, you have these ups and downs, and I just feel like over time, I do feel like iOS and iPadOS are becoming less and less restrictive and boring for the power
Mhm.
user, and that's a big. I think that's a big difference, and a big reason that you know, Apple's being more successful is they're tying to power users more, and they're tying to budget users more.
Yeah. And then that's really it for the main things I wanted to talk about with iPhone. The other thing though that I wanted to mention that's again, I had mentioned about Android updates when we were talking about messages. Something that this is very different with iPhone. So every iPhone since the iPhone 6S, which released in 2015, is getting this update.
Yep.
That includes the iPhone SE first gen, which released in 2016 but was very cheap. So a cheap phone from 4 years ago and the high end phone from 5 years ago are getting such like the most significant upgrade we've seen in 7 years.
Oh yeah, this is a huge deal.
There's not a
Yeah.
single Android phone that has ever gotten a 7-year-old Android update, except for
Oh yeah.
ones that were made by the community after the fact.
Yep. So pretty amazing. I'm glad they're
Yeah.
doing it. All right. So iPad also is getting an update, iPadOS. I'm still really glad that these are separate things now, iPadOS and iOS.
Yes.
Was that a change made with 13? That was made with 13, wasn't it?
I think it was either 13 or 12. I
Okay. Okay.
think it was 12, but 13 was a
I think it's a great
13
move.
was a huge update. That was like the where it really differentiated itself from iOS.
Yeah.
Um, Now, iPadOS 14 is interesting. It's a big update, but it's not anywhere near as big as iPhone's update in some ways
Yeah.
because let's talk about widgets first. Um, so the new widgets are coming to iPad. However, they aren't placeable. I mean, iOS or iPhone widgets aren't placeable anywhere you place them in specific. Like they have to be placed all the way to the left or right. They can't be in the middle, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
iPadOS, you can't place widgets in the app grid. They still stay on the side. And if
Interesting.
initially I was like, "Oh, that sucks," that's stupid. Either way, I still think it's a bummer. But I thought that was stupid. But I realized the reason why, and it makes sense. On iPhone, you don't rotate the home screen. And so it doesn't have to
Yeah.
rearrange where everything is placed. And that could be problematic with how iPhone keeps everything to a grid, especially. But even then, even on Android, for those that do that, it kind of just looks bad. Your home screen doesn't ever look as good in its horizontal view
This is true.
when you
Yeah.
can do that. And so that's really what it seems like is why is that you can rotate the home screen. Like Apple's, as much as they've been pushing the idea of using it as a laptop in some ways, the idea of Apple seeing the iPad as the future of a computer is that it can be a laptop and a tablet and kind of just be whatever. And that's how they see the future of computing with this device. And
Yeah.
if you try and force things into the horizontal viewpoint, then you're kind of getting rid of that. At which point you're getting rid of one of the benefits of the tablet, and so they don't want to do that, and so they're keeping it to that one
Yeah.
side. I
Because they want you to buy a Mac if that's the direction you really are going to
Yeah,
go,
um,
is where you're
I
trying to do that kind
I
of
do
stuff.
think
Yeah.
eventually we'll see them bring this to the home screen, but I think that they're going to want to figure out a better way to do it, and they just want to take their
Yeah.
time and be deliberate. It's if you were to just do it now, you'd run into issues where depending on app layout, you'd sometimes have it where depending on if you rotate it, you'd have like sections of emptiness that don't make sense for the fact
Yeah.
that iOS forces apps to the top corner. Um,
Right.
and so it just would not fit in the way that iOS is built and designed. Um, However, the new widgets are still coming. Anything that is built for iPhone widget system can be taken advantage of in this. Smart stacks will even be a part of the new widget system. Stackable widgets, you can still get some of that. It's just not directly on the home screen in the way that it is on the iPhone.
Yeah.
But it ultimately does end up making some sense given the context of how they see the iPad as a product.
Yeah. No,
So,
that makes sense. And yeah, I
um,
I I guess I don't. I still would like it, but I don't
yeah,
hate.
that's where I'm at. Is
Yeah.
like when I first heard about it, I was like not upset, but like I was just annoyed. I thought that was a dumb decision. Now I
Yeah.
think it's the smart decision from looking at it as how Apple views products. It's just not necessarily the decision I want them to have made.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. Yeah.
the next thing, and this is a really big update, universal search. Now, the naming of this is kind of stupid. So they had Spotlight Search on iPad, and now they're switching to
Right.
universal search, even though universal search on iPad is much more like Spotlight Search on Mac. Um, so the way that this works is it's a more compact UI, but that's not really the important part. This new version of search on the iPad can be initiated from anywhere over any app. I don't know what the gesture is
That's a
to
big
launch
deal.
it without a keyboard, but there is some kind of like gesture to do it. But you can just
Yeah.
from anywhere you can launch your search tool, and then
It's like a Windows key. I mean, that's what I use the Windows key for,
exactly.
you know. So,
And then
yeah.
there's also like there's a Windows app that you can, or not an app, I guess. There's a program you can download for Windows where you press like Windows and space, and it launches a search bar directly over the middle of your screen. It's actually really nice. And
Yeah.
this is kind of like that, where it's like the search comes up over the middle of your screen. You can search for anything. I mean, iOS's search is already pretty comprehensive, but this is just much more
Yeah.
improved. So if you're searching the web with this, then it is much more refined and just like much more relevant search suggestions. And then if
Yeah.
you are searching for an app, obviously you'll find the app. But if you're searching for, let's say you search for a contact, it should give you more options than it did before to interact with that contact, as well as if it's like you're searching for a name, you can actually decide to, instead of like trying to scroll through the list of contacts in the search bar, there's going to be an option to just use that search to search your contacts. So use that search to search any other app. Um, and so you can use this in a much more useful and like kind of more powerful way to search through
I
everything.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really nice. That's and it's actually kind of in some ways is a better implementation than how Windows has it, because Windows can still only use Edge if you want to search the web down there,
Yeah. Whereas
which is just such a huge
iOS
disappointment.
normally, right now searches or anything is defaulted to Safari, but Apple is integrating defaults for web browsers and defaults for email apps across iOS and
Android has
iPadOS.
also had that.
Oh, I know. Um, and
But yeah, it's a good move and is consistently trying to help the iPad be a more usable laptop.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as the defaults go, real quick, also I wanted to mention that was something else that was discussed in the Marquez and the Craig interview. And specifically, Craig was asked why it's just browsers and email.
Hmm.
And he talked about with browsers how they were concerned about, again, malicious intent, where if anything could be flagged as a browser, and a lot of apps have browsers built in, so it wouldn't be hard for them to say, we are a browser, flag us as a browser because we literally have the code for it. Um, and
Yeah.
then now we can all of a sudden become your default. Obviously, this is something that could happen on Android, but doesn't often. But it's not like it
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah.
It just doesn't often. We see all the
Yeah.
time issues with Android apps abusing default systems in some way or defaulting permission systems in some way. And so Apple is very much trying to avoid that, and they're not letting just any app flag themselves as a browser to become default. Apple has to
Right.
specifically review and approve them. Initially, it's just going to be the big stuff. They are making sure that smaller browsers, independently developed browsers, will have that ability. Just it'll be a part of the iOS review process to ensure that like Apple will have to okay
Instead of
it
just flipping it
before
on.
that
Yeah.
permission or before that default is enabled for that app.
And can I just dart in here and say, to literally every app developer in the world, please stop putting browsers into your app built in. I just want to open my default browser,
If you're going to
and there are
have it
so
built
many.
in, have it a toggle where you can choose whether or not to launch the built-in browser or not.
Yes, yes, that's exactly the problem I have. Is there's so many apps for Android where you can't have it open up the default browser by default. So you tap a link, and then sometimes it takes you to a page in the app, which you tap another link, which goes to the in-app browser, and then you tap a drop down and then tap open in default browser. It is a huge pain, and it frustrates me. So some people are going to hate me, but I use Bing search instead of Google search on my phone. Okay. And the Bing search app is actually a great app. In fact, Google could learn a thing or two about, stop shaking your
Use
head at me. Google could
DuckDuckGo if
learn a
you're
thing
not
or
going to
two.
use freaking Google.
No, Google could learn a thing about how the fact that the Bing app is dark themed, and Google still hasn't done that with Google's search app. So it's dark themed.
Yeah.
And by the way, Google Assistant is dark themed. It's just Google Search that's not. So anyway, but with the Bing app, I can't have it open those search results in my default browser. It opens in the Bing app browser, which has its own tabs. Even though Microsoft Edge exists for Android, it doesn't open in Edge. It opens in the Bing multi-tab browser. And so every time you open a search, like that's one thing about the Google one is you do a search and you open a link. When you close it and then you do another search and open a link, it gets rid of the prior one. Bing doesn't do that, which yes is nice in case you want to look back in a past search, but also sucks because then, if you're not a user that's paying attention, you end up having, 60 Bing tabs open.
It sounds like you should just not use Bing.
Okay, if we're being honest here, when it comes to search engine tech, Bing and Google, some people will try to tell you they get similar results, and in some cases that's true, but actually no. It's not that one or the other is better. It's, in my opinion, that if you're trying to find the answer to a really complex question, searching in both will get you places of the internet that the either doesn't, where people are talking about it. There have been times where I search for a really hard issue and I find it in Bing and not Google. And
But we're not
versa.
talking about when you're searching for issues like that. We're talking about what you use as your normal daily search engine.
Well, yeah, but general search Bing is fine.
I know,
The only problem is Bing Maps.
But you could use DuckDuckGo. Or
Okay,
you could use Ecosia, which don't they use Bing anyway?
Okay. Yes.
So then
yes,
use
search
that.
engine tech, but then there's the other advantage, right? So you should get paid for your data.
Or you could plant
Bing
trees.
pays you for your data. Bing pays you for your data.
Or you could plant trees.
You get Bing points. And you redeem them for real like Starbucks and stuff.
Or
and so like
you could help the environment.
Okay, but you could also use it to help the environment. So that's the thing is I hate you. So you get this opportunity though where like you're at, like it kind of goes along with the idea of you should own your data, you should get paid for your data. Microsoft's like, yeah, we're using your data to enhance our advertising, so here we'll pay you for your data.
That could be a whole podcast of its own, so we should move on from that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But anyway, I was just bringing that up there. Is thank you Apple for making some of that stuff just so much better.
The next big feature, this is something that I'm personally excited for, Scribble. So what this is so Apple Pencil is something that I actually just recently got and I started messing with and like more than I thought. But one of the issues I've had is there's many times where I'm using the pencil and then I want to go, do something else within the OS and I have to, put my pencil down to type or whatever when yes, typing is going to be much faster, but it would be nice if I'm doing something like just say like a quick search of something to be able to just write it out. It's going to be easier and more convenient to just write it out than it is to, put my pencil down, I have a little stand for it, put it somewhere else, type it out, and then grab my pencil again if I want to keep using my pencil. And it's just sometimes it's nice to just have that feeling of handwriting. So, and so it's nice to have that, but you can't do that in most apps. Well, Scribble changes all of that. What Scribble is Apple is essentially integrating handwriting as text into every text field within the OS on iPadOS. If it is a text field on iPadOS, you can write on it. So that means the search bar, that means any search app, that means anything. And then from there, they are adding a few features to just make it easier to utilize the pencil. So if you want to delete some text, you can just scribble over the text and it deletes it. If you want to highlight a word or a phrase or something to copy or move it, you draw a circle around it. Pretty simple. But then they're adding a lot more to it too for more in-depth use than just writing. So all of the text can be very easily converted into normal typed out text. So if you're again doing like a search within an app, obviously Google isn't going to search handwritten text. So you can write it in there and it just converts it into the normal text. But if you're writing into an app that can have the handwritten text. One of the things as I've been looking at note apps is Notability, for example. You have to pay extra on top of paying for the app in order to be able to search handwritten text. Well, they're just making that part of how text works. So because of Scribble, handwriting text is treated as text even if it's still in handwriting view. And so you can highlight it within any app, treat it like any app, copy paste, move it around, search it, whatever you want to do, as if you would normally be doing with text, but it's in its handwritten look if you want that. And then in addition to that, you can copy handwritten text and then paste it into another app as traditional text. So if you, let's say you like the feeling of writing something out by hand, but you need to have a typed up paper for school, you could handwrite it out, copy paste it, and then just reformat it, like, with spacing and everything,
Yeah.
to be that text document you need. And a lot of people have
Right.
been looking
Okay.
at buying iPads specifically as ways to get rid of paper but still have that paper feel. There's a screen protector called Paperlike that is literally designed to make it feel like you're still writing on paper for people that really like that. And so this is great for that. It's great for just general input, great for just not having to put your pencil away for really dumb reasons. It's a
Yeah.
pretty significant change to the OS, in my opinion, in that it just makes the pencil more useful.
I like it. I've never been a heavy stylus
Mhm.
person for sure. I will say that I still prefer Samsung's way of putting the stylus inside the device over these magnetic attachments
Oh,
that like
I
Apple
agree
and
with that
Microsoft have
part.
been doing.
That's very
Yeah.
different, but usability of it though is
Oh
now
yeah,
much
yeah, no,
different, and
absolutely, yeah,
that to me though
yeah,
matters much more. It matters to me much more if using the stylus is going to be useful than where the stylus goes.
yeah. Oh yeah, no, no, for sure. I agree, I agree, and I maybe I'll consider getting one. I don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean,
um,
to me, this update makes it just much more useful and something that more people who might have not if you know you don't want it, then you don't want it. But if you were on the fence, I feel like
yeah.
this just makes it a much better experience. I mean, I'll have to wait and see once the public beta comes out how well I like it in practice. But so far as I've been using the pencil, it seems like most of the issues that I have had as far as not being able to do things are solved by this.
And that's good, and that's good, and Apple has done a pretty good job with trying to make stylus usage
Mhm.
usable. I feel like Microsoft's also done a good job of it, whereas I still feel like with Samsung devices you just don't use it very
Yeah.
much. And with Android devices, I should say, not Samsung. It's not built the same way. Android still sucks for that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
and I mean, despite the fact that Samsung has a lot of control, they just don't utilize it for that because,
Yeah, yeah.
like,
Well, I mean, smaller screen, you can't do as much
well,
anyway,
and I mean, even
right?
even
Like,
then
but
though, like, I feel like the stylus initially was meant to be, more of a power user tool, but it's kind of just become, I feel like, personally, something that they only keep there because they have to with the Note. I don't
mm-hmm.
think that they really based on the fact that they haven't given it that much care, like, what are the new features they've added recently? Like, you can use it to interact with the camera. That's not a I mean, that's nice. It's nice to have, like, a little remote
It's
for it.
actually a cool
Yeah,
feature, yeah,
but
but
it's
it's
not a
just like it's not
stylus
related
thing.
to
Yeah,
it.
I can do that from my
Yeah,
Apple
yeah,
Watch.
yeah. Right, right.
Like,
There's plenty of other
yeah.
methods to do that.
And it's like
Yeah,
they're trying to find ways to keep it a power user tool because they feel like they have to have it, is more so the sense that I get from Samsung than that they
yeah.
think this is like a good unique product that they want to keep adding features for because it's a good helpful tool.
And part of me almost wonders if that's just a mistake. I don't think like
I mean,
the point of the Note series has never like okay, so let me phrase this right. I think from a user standpoint, the point of the Note series has never been about the stylus and has been about the bigger phone with more power user features like a battery and
yeah.
stuff like that.
Um, I
And like,
I think that if
go
they
ahead.
had not tied the name of the phone to the Note
Mm-hmm.
idea, I think they could have gotten rid of it much more easily. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, realistically,
they'll get a lot of criticism if they
realistically
remove
now,
it.
like, let's be real, other than, like, a little bit of a design difference sometimes, The Note's not that much different than the higher end Galaxy S phones anyway.
Yeah, so now it is a differentiating feature.
Stylus.
Sorry, say again, it
All
cut
the
out.
Note really is just a Galaxy S with a stylus.
And usually a couple performance bumps and stuff, but that's just because they wait
Yeah,
longer.
but now that Samsung's been
Yeah.
doing the half year
Ultra.
upgrades where they do the higher end one later, it's like you
Yeah,
have the
yeah.
Galaxy series launch, then you have the Note launch at a little bit higher performance, and then you have a new Galaxy launch at a higher performance, and then 6 months later the cycle starts again.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know, like from my experience of using the stylus on the Note, like it is nice for some things, but not really for stylus things. It's almost just nice to have something more precise, not so much for the being able to draw and stuff like
Yeah.
that, you know.
So, and then really that's the last thing with iPadOS that I wanted to cover. The other big thing, again, we talked about updates with iPhone. iPadOS is coming to every iPad since the iPad Air 2, which came out in October of 2014. So we have 6 years of updates on iPad.
It's a pretty big deal there, actually.
Yeah, that's just wild.